What's up, guys? I'm going to go through some of the basic workflow tips that I have been using for a while that I've picked up along the way from some of my favorite artists, and some of the ways that I approach doing different pieces, the different softwares I use for different reasons, and just some of the things that made my life a lot easier that I had to figure out, and through buying a few Gumroad courses and following different things and listening to my mentors and talking to people. So I'm going to try and condense some basic workflow tips into like one video. So you'll see on the screen here, I had my references up. A lot of the things, so obviously you have to do reference before you wanting to do a piece. And a lot of the things that I do is I'll try and keep the references in my actual piece when I'm doing it, in one layer, in a group layer that I can just turn on and off whenever I need them. Another thing that I do, because I have a Huey on screen, so on my screen on my left will be my Mac, and I'll just open up the different images that I feel will be good reference, and I set them up in there. And it's good or for me at least, I found it's really good to have your references on a smaller screen, because in that way you don't get overloaded by reference. I do think having too much reference can be almost overwhelming, especially when like starting out, because if you have too much, you almost get flustered. I remember like someone once called it internet fatigue. So you're going on Pinterest searching for a whole bunch of images to try and use as reference to build this piece that you want to build, and you're going through all this stuff and you're like, geez, there's just so much. I don't know, like there's just too much. And then eventually you start thinking like, Jesus, actually a really lot of freaking good stuff as well. And then you're like, oh, and then that's internet fatigue. So what I mean is limiting your references is a really good idea, especially when starting out. And I think, to be honest, whenever, I think only have enough reference that you can kind of tolerate during the piece. So if you have too much, then it becomes overwhelming, and you obviously don't want to be overwhelmed when you're painting a piece. You want to be able to go in as peaceful as possible. And yeah, so that's another thing. I really like to do as much research and set up as much things before I go into starting. So I allow myself to enter into a flow state. So for me, flow state is super important. They call it Wu Wei. I know Alan Watts has a talk on it on YouTube, and there's like a whole bunch of talks on what Wu Wei is. But essentially, Wu Wei is just the art of not really forcing things. So it's not an excuse to be lazy. It's just the art of not forcing things and allowing yourself to enter into like a flow state. And this is why I do a whole bunch of research before. I get all my images, set them up, and then I make a bullet point list of kind of the idea, the direction I want to have. And I go through the list, look at my reference images, and then when I start, I don't need to keep going back and forth, because I've got my references opened. I've got my bullet point list of what I want to do. I've already thought about kind of the idea that I want to get across and the way I want to communicate it and all these things. And in that way, I don't need to limit my flow. I don't need to break the flow. So I don't know how true it is, but I heard this thing that says you enter into flow after like 30 minutes of doing your thing. So you enter into flow like once you've been doing it for like a little while. When you hit flow, you almost just are reacting to what you've learned. And I know Bruce Lee said that he fears not the man who's learned 1,000 different kicks, but the man who has practiced one kick 1,000 times. And I thought that was really freaking awesome. So the guy that can enter into flow almost by default. So he, in the light of this, he talks about like he trains to react. So he trains this one kick to just react in the moment. And I think the training part is really important, because training, yes, and also just thinking about it and planning before as well. Because when you plan before, you already have the idea in your mind, you have the references in your mind, you've done the planning, and then when you're in the moment, you almost when you're in the flow of the piece, you almost are just like reacting to what you've already planned. And it's almost like what happens, but it's not, obviously it's not exactly like that, but you've done all you can. You've done all the training and the planning you can, so you don't need to really stress too much or control too much because you've done all that you can. And that's an amazing thing to be able to like do all you can, give the best to what you can, control what you can, and give your best on what you can control, and then kind of just like let go of the things you can't control and let the piece come together, almost on its own, based on what you've controlled. I remember studying this type of, I studied an art form. It's called conceptual art. It's not really concept art, but conceptual art is kind of, they have this idea of like a genotype and a phenotype. So I know like Joseph Bayes and these old artists, actually they were doing this kind of stuff where they would set up the environment, and then let the things in the environment interact with each other. So, so for example, what is this guy's name? I can't actually remember his name exactly, but he put like a whole bunch of bugs in a glass cage, in a glass container, and he put gold pieces there, and the bugs would just build these little shells around them of gold. And he almost like said that the bugs were then the artist, because he just set up. He was the genotype, the setting up of the environment, and then the phenotype of the unfolding of the environment. But this is not a podcast about bugs and gold. So what I mean is we do what we can, and then we let it unfold naturally. So yeah, some of the tools that I use, I mean, I use Photoshop, very standard, and another piece of, well, so yeah, in the beginning, before I started doing this, I just built a very basic mesh out of shapes in Blender, just to get my perspective right, to get my just a general idea of what I wanted. And I found with very rigid shapes, it's really easy, and then getting more organic shapes is a little bit harder. And what I did with the tree here, in this case, was I took a meta ball, and what's cool is when you duplicate it, it almost like attaches to itself. So I did this all with I did the main shape with a meta ball, and then converted it to a normal mesh. If you go object, convert to, and it'll say convert to mesh in Blender, I'm talking about. And then I just exported that, and I was able to paint over that, because then the geometry was worked out. Everything was kind of in place. I put like I put the lights in the places where I wanted them to be. So I set up this environment. So when I came in, it was almost like a lot of it had been done already, so that when I go into the flow state, it was really easy to go into. And so obviously use Photoshop here, as you can see. And a lot of the things you've seen me do up until this point is very rough. Like if you zoom in, it's really like, it looks like a big mess. But what I'm really going for here is I want to bring the whole piece up together. I know Marco Bucci said this, where you want to bring the whole piece up together, not leaving anything behind. And that when I heard it, I didn't really understand exactly what he meant. And the more I'm doing it, the more I'm actually understanding what he means when he says that, is that I almost don't finish one thing before I've like moved on to bringing something else. So it's like you bringing the whole thing up as one. And that was a really cool tip that I actually got from him. And yeah, so that's what I'm doing here. I'm putting like all the lighting, the general color scheme that I want based on my model, and just the general reflectivity, almost the general, what the general surfaces are going to be. So it's very general in this stage. It's not very specific. And you find the longer the general stage is, the more you get, the quicker you actually capture the feeling of what you're trying to paint. So yeah, I'm just trying to distinguish which areas are going to be reflective and which areas are not. Okay, so it's at this stage now. So now I'm entering into Sketchbook Pro. Sketchbook Pro is freaking awesome, guys. If you haven't tried Sketchbook Pro, it is such a cool piece of software. It's You can see the brushes that I've got on the left there. You can make your own brushes, but you literally don't even need to. You get such an organic, messy, very painterly kind of a style, and the brushes they look super organic. I have had Sketchbook Pro for a while, but I've never really actually taken the time to delve into it. So with this project, I was like, okay, this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna use Blender, Photoshop, and Sketchbook Pro. So Sketchbook Pro is super cool. The painterly brushes they literally give the most organic look. It literally looks like it's been painted with like oils, which is so cool. And that's the other thing, is like trying these kinds of things. It gets you like stoked, because that's why you started it in the first place. You know what I mean? You wanted to make cool stuff like when you were young, trying new things and all these things. And when I opened up Sketchbook Pro, trying all these new different tools and different approaches of doing the piece, I was just getting so excited, because I'm like, yo, this is so cool. This is another new tool that I've picked up that I can actually use now in the future. And I'm definitely gonna be using Sketchbook Pro for a long time. You can check the ruler tool that I've got going there. It's so easy because you can just flip it on and off, and it's really easy to navigate. It's literally like you working with a ruler like in real life, it's so cool. Yeah. And there's perspective tools, and it's pretty much like Photoshop condensed. And what's cool is like a lot of the hotkeys are actually the same. That's what I found. So like all your essential ones, like if you're pressing L, you want to select. Then Control R is the ruler. Obviously, color dabbing is the same. So yeah, it's really easy to transition to. And if you're looking for a more organic kind of a painterly type of style, this is a really cool piece of software to use. And yeah, I would highly recommend it. So yeah, so at the stage that I'm doing now is I'm almost just refining what I have there already. So I started off very general, and now I'm busy adding in some of the details, the important details. I don't actually think this piece was the most detailed piece, but I think I had a lot of fun with it because I was trying a whole bunch of new different ways of approaching a piece, I love doing that. I love like trying new things is like what I love about art the most. As soon as I get too comfortable with something, I get bored. So I think it's actually a good thing to get bored as an artist, because that way you always get to try new types of stuff that are going to ignite the fire, that are going to just going to get you hyped, and then that's where you can get creative with it. So yeah, you can see here I'm literally like, there's orange on that tree. I'm literally like painting in the light. So there's actually 4 light sources in this particular image. So it was the main light, the key light probably on the top right, and then obviously the lantern there hanging on the tree. And then I actually set up two very small dim rim lights coming from the back. I set those up in Blender. So that's the other cool thing about Blender, that it actually calculates the light for you, which is super awesome. Cool, dude. Thank you so much for stopping by. And I'd love to know what you guys thought of this one. And I'll check you guys in the next one. Cheers.